right away. Okay. Mem Hey Meves Mishnah. Nifter Zikne Yerushalayim v'Holchulan Zikne Oisei Ir. Okay, so basically we're in the middle of discussion of Egla Rufa, and they've already measured the city. They've determined which is the closest city. According to Rabbi Eliezer, it could even be two closest cities. And now it's time for the event, the procedure to occur. So what do? Mevian Zikne Oisei, the Zikanim, that means the base.
Rabbi, I'm sorry, tell me the page position again, please. I just got on.
45b at the Mishnah.
45b at the Mishnah. Okay.
Last Mishnah, so it's 5 lines from the bottom. Zikne Oisei Mevian Eglas Boker. So, like we explained before, there's 2 levels of Sanhedrin. There's Sanhedrin Hagadol, the great Sanhedrin. That's the group of 70, along with another 70 interns, clerks, whatever you want to call it. They had to be in their chambers in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. And then there's what they call Sanhedrin Tana, a mini Sanhedrin. It's a convocation of 23, again, with interns and clerks. And every large city had one. A convocation of 23 is able to convict and execute capital punishment. So, and additionally, there was one of these, Sanhedrin Tana, there was on the Temple Mount. There was, in addition to the group of 70, there was also a group of 23. Okay, so Zikne Oisei Mevian Eglas Bakar Asher Lo Moshcha Ba'ol. So the elders of that city, they bring an Eglas Bakar. They bring an Egel is a young cow, a young calf. Asher Lo Moshcha Ba'ol, which never pulled a load. The Ein Hamum Paitzal. However, if there was a blemish, because it's not a sacrifice, it does not invalidate it. When we're reading Nachal Esan, they bring it down to Nachal Esan. What is a Nachal Esan? We'll discuss it in the Gemara. Nachal literally means a river, and Esan means sort of bedrock. The idea here is it's a place, Esan Kimashmai, it's rock, like the simple definition of the word, meaning it's a rocky surface, and things will not grow on it. And the Gemara says, Kosher Av B'She'ena Esan Kosher. Let's say it's hard ground, which isn't conducive to growth, to agricultural growth. Even if it's not rock, it's also kosher. Okay, you find this spot. Okay, you split it with a axe from behind. And the place where you do this, where this procedure is done, becomes prohibited to plant, and we'll soon see it becomes prohibited to service the ground in any manner that involves growing things from the ground. In other words, you're allowed to use the space, as we'll see, but you're not allowed to use the ground, whether it's planting, whether it's growing, etc. However, you're allowed to comb through flax. That means you're using the surface space, even if you're not using the ground itself. And let's say you want to paint rocks or you want to clean rocks for whatever purpose. So that is permitted to take place on that spot. Okay. The elders of the city, they wash their hands with water. The makam arifa shel egla. 1 second. Okay, they washed their hands over the place where the animal was split in half. And they say, they wash their hands and say, our hands did not spill this person's blood. And our eyes haven't seen it. We don't know the cause. The Gemara asks, do we think that the members of the Sanhedrin Kollel, these obviously were senior people, do you think that these were a bunch of murderers? God forbid. Obviously not. We're not responsible for him having come to our community. And we sent them without food. Because if that did happen, then it is likely that played a role in his death. Could be that he was trying to take food from somebody else, and in self-defense they killed him. And we did not let him go alone. We'll talk about Levia soon. The basic idea of Levia, which we'll see there, is direction. So they didn't give him direction. We're top of Menvav Ben Aleph now, the top of the page, 46a. So Levia, in other words, he got lost. And that's how we got met up with highwaymen. But Kehanim Oimrim, and the Kehanim say, Kapar Lamchi Yisrael Asher Padiso, forgive your nation, the Jewish people, Asher Padiso, which you redeemed, Hashem Baltitin Dam Naki B'Karav Amchi Yisrael, and don't lay the blame of this person's murder amongst the Jews. Okay. And that was the end of the event of Egla Rufa. However, the verse continues, and the Gemara explains, they would not say the words, and this blood should be an atonement, because that's not a statement the Kehana make. Rather, it's a statement, El Ruach HaKodesh, the heavenly spirit, Mivas Rosan, announces, when you perform this event as follows, Adam Miskaper Lahem, the blood will atone. Okay, the next Gemara is we call a Cheshbon Gemara. There's a lot of calculations in the Gemara. It's not particularly difficult, but hopefully I won't get lost, and I won't lead you down the wrong path or leave you without navigation. Okay, let's give a little bit of background here. Probably makes sense to read the full verses here. Okay, so let's start with that. You have the fancier Gemaras that have what they call a Tur or Hashalom. You can see the full verse on the side of the page. Okay. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Let's talk about three types of events that happen, rituals that occur with animals. One of them is Egla Arufa. Egla Arufa is a murdered body. We discover the closest city. We take the Egla, the young calf, and we put it in the spot where there was a dead body, and we strike it. We strike it from the back. This is not slaughtering; it's the opposite of slaughtering. And we try to split the animal in half, and pour water, etc. Okay, what type of calf is eligible? So I'm just reading you directly from the pasuk. Okay, they take Eglas Bokar. Eglas Bokar is a calf of Bokar, the cattle. Asher loy ubad ba, which did not work. Asher loy ubad ba, which did not work. Asher loy moshcha ba'ol, which did not, moshcha is carry, it did not transport an oil, a load. Okay, so what are the qualifications the Torah teaches us? It has to be an eglah, which means it has to be a calf. It has to be ashaloi ubadba, which this calf did not engage in any labor at any point in time, and it never carried a burden. Okay. Another event that requires another ritual that requires a calf, which requires a cattle, is paraduma, the red heifer. So if you have the Torah or Ashal and the fancier Gemaras, you're looking at letter Bays on the side of the page. I'll just read you the entire verse. Okay, Vayikchu elecha par aduma. You'll take a red heifer. Requirement number 1, a red heifer. Tamima. What does tamima mean? Tamima means complete. Tama means complete. What does that imply? No mum, no blemishes. That's not tamima. It's not complete then. Asher ein ba mum, that doesn't have a mum. Okay, so there you have it. Asher loy Allah aleha oil, that a load has never gone onto it. Notice the distinction here. The first thing the Torah mentions is that Tamima Asher Ein Bamum, it needs to be complete and not have a blemish. Does not mention that by Egla Rufa. And additionally, it says Asher Lo Ola Ola oil. A load has not gone onto the animal. By Egla Rufa, what does it say? Asher Lo Moshcha Ola oil. Moshach means to pull, to move. So by Egla Rufa, it has to move a load. And by Par Aduma, the simple reading of the verse is Asher Lo Ola Ola. No burden has gone onto it. A much more stringent category. Okay, and the final category is a regular carbon. A regular carbon, you can take any animal as long as it's, now certain carbonas have age requirements. Carbon oil and carbon chados have to be we call ben shana, within a year old, and some of them do, some of them don't. They cannot have a moment; they have to be tamimim. However, you can take a work animal and sanctify it, turn it into a carbon. There's none of this requirement that it cannot have carried a burden or worked. That only exists only by Egla Rufa and Paraduma. Furthermore, once you sanctify the animal, it is prohibited to use the animal for work. What happens if he did it anyway? Still kosher. Still bring it as a korban. It's fine. Okay, now the Gemara, this long Gemara, which effectively will take us to the bottom of the page, sort of tries to understand the interrelationships and the limitations of each restriction in the type of animal selected for the ritual for each of these three rituals. Okay, again, if I go slowly, it's mainly because I don't want to get myself lost. I certainly don't want to get you lost, because then I might have to bring an egla rufa. Okay. The Haman Paisel be'egla mikal v'chaymer. Okay. So egla rufa, a load invalidates it. A mum, we don't know. Mum is a blemish. We have no clue. So Gemara suggests maybe a mum should also invalidate an egla rufa. Mikal v'chaymer, by comparing it to para, the red heifer. Uma para, just like the red heifer. She'ein hashan and paisless ba. The red heifer could be any age. There's no limitation on the year. It doesn't say egla. Egla is a limitation. It's a year old. I think they call it a yearling. But para aduma, the red heifer, no limitation. Despite the fact there's no limitation, mum paisaba, yet a blemish still invalidates it. Egla, the concept of egla rufa, the ritual, sheshan and paisaba, that years do invalidate it. It needs to be 1 year old. Ein adin shehei mum paisaba. It should certainly be the case that if it has one stringency, that it has to be a year old. In other words, age is a factor. It certainly should have a second stringency that a blemish should invalidate it. The Gemara says no, not a valid comparison. Why not? Shani Hasan to Amar Kra Asher Ein Ba Mum. Because if you read the verse, it says Asher Ein Ba, referring to the red heifer. This red heifer, in it, there's no blemish. What's the ba? The ba is a limitation. Ba mum paisel, but mum paisel be'egla. Specifically, the blemish invalidates a paraduma. But with regard to an egla, there's no invalidation. A blemished animal is kosher for the ritual of egla roof. Okay, elameata, if that's the case, la yu shar avoidis paisel ba. 1 second. Okay. If that's the case, we should say, now again, when the Torah speaks of the red heifer, it says what it tells us what type of what exactly invalidates a red heifer, either a blemish or that a load has not gone onto the animal. Now, if it's the case that the word ba is a limitation, then we know the halacha is that not only is a para aduma invalid by having a load placed on it, it is also invalidated by engaging in work, even if there was no loads. How do we know that? We learn it from Egla Rufa. The Gemara says, now that you're telling me that ba is a limitation, by Egla Rufa, it says Asher Lo Ubad Ba. In the Egla Rufa, there hasn't been a loads. Other types of work should not invalidate a red heifer. Alama Amar Yehudah Amarav and Yechala Oidish Osak and Psula. If somebody puts a what is translate Oidish Osakin? What was the article saying? It's sort of like a sack, I think. It's a bunch of sacks. Bundle of sacks. That's what it is. So this is a non-load because it's just an empty sacks, empty bags. Okay. But by egla achitimshach, you have to actually the animal has to carry it. Okay. Now, the idea that putting an empty load on a para should invalidate the para, that's the red heifer. This is learnt from Egla Rufa. 1 second. Okay. Now, even though this is not what we call an oil, this is not a burden because it's just a bunch of sacks. It's still invalidated, and it's invalidated because we compare para to egla. The question is why is para compared to egla if by egla itself it says ashalai ubarba? There's a limitation of the whatever states by egla should be limited to egla rufa, that is. So Mara says shiny para the alfinan oil me egla. Para is compared to egla rufa because the word oil is used by para. It's also used by egla rufa. They're compared to each other. So Gemara says, hold on. If they're compared to each other, egla nami tesi oil mi para. If they're compared to each other, then why can't we say that egla rufa should learn the concept of mum, of a blemish, that just like a blemish invalidates a para, it should also invalidate an egla rufa. So Gemara says, hamir rachman ba. The Torah says ba. It's a limitation by para. Hold on. The egla nami ksiv ba. By egla rufa, it also says ba. There's also a limitation. So how could you compare? How could you learn para from egla? Because in both, you're telling me you can't learn egla from para because by para it says ba. Well, actually, by egla it also says ba. So you should not be able to learn para from egla. So the Gemara says the ba of egla is not coming to limit para duma, or red heifer. It's coming to limit a regular carbon. That by a regular animal that's being brought as a sacrifice, even if that animal was a workhorse. Obviously not a horse, but okay, it was a work animal. It is still not invalidated if it was a work animal. You can still bring it as a carbon. I would have think I would think you can make a kal v'chomer to learn that other sacrifices should become invalidated with work. Why? You look at egla. It does not become invalidated with a blemish, and yet it does become invalidated with a by having been a work animal. So kachim shamum paselas behen, kachim that a blemish invalidates, and in shavayda paselas behen, it should certainly be the case that avoda work should also invalidate it. So the Gemara says there's no comparison. Why? Ma'ala egla shekain shonim paselas by. Egla is different because years invalidate the egla. One second. Okay. In other words, you can't compare a carbon to egla because egla is unique. Egla, in a certain sense, is more stringent than kachim, than a regular sacrifice. Why? Because egla rufa has a year requirement, an age requirement. It's a yearling. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. There are certain types of sacrifices that are also invalidated with year, by being a year old. For example, Pesach and Chatos, they have to be a year old. So the Gemara says, for the kachim that are invalidated by being a year old, those kachim, maybe I would think that work actually invalidates them as well. So therefore the word ba tells me that no. Ba is a limitation. The only time work invalidates an animal for a ritual is for the ritual of egla rufa, and not for a carbon, not for a sacrifice. As the Gemara, is the source that kachim do not become invalidated by work is the source actually egla rufa. Mehasanafka, we have another source. Torah lists some of the invalidating blemishes. Averes, it's blind. A shavar, it has a broken bone. A charetz, a abelatz, it has a wart. A garav, a yalefes, lesakrivu elel Hashem. These types of blemishes are all invalidate an animal. The Gemara says, Ela iyatamakriv, avatamakriv, kachim shenev behen avodah. These types of animals are not kosher for sacrifices. However, you could bring a carbon of a carbon that was used as a work animal. Okay, so we see clearly here that the source that a work animal is kosher for kachim is not egla rufa. It's from a verse that it says with regard to kachim that only blemishes invalidate, not work. So the Gemara says it's still necessary. Why? I would have thought hiding The Gemara says maybe there's a distinction between forbidden labor and permitted labor. What's an example of forbidden labor? An example of forbidden labor would be one of the prohibitions of klayim. That would be, let's say, taking an animal, ox, and plowing a field together with a donkey. That would be forbidden labor. Yeah. Another possibility is if he points his animal at violating Shabbos. So obviously, if your animal eats from the ground, that's not considered a violation of Shabbos. However, there is a violation called mechamer. You are not allowed to have your animals engage in forbidden activity specifically. So by hooking your animal up to a plow and plowing the field with an animal, that's a violation of Shabbos, even if the animal can do it without you actually holding down the plow or something like that. Or if you have them drive around the threshing floor and you whip them to do it, even though you didn't actually thresh it, you have the animal thresh it, that's a prohibition. And if during Kiddush, we say, your shor and your chamor, your cow, your ox and your donkey, they can't engage in melacha on Shabbos. So maybe that would prohibit an animal. So the Gemara says that's what you need to do not become invalidated by work. Why? Because the verse says, yeah. So this verse basically says you can't take you don't use an animal with a blemish as a korban, and we call Ela from any of this list of blemishes. And the Gemara explains Ela iat demakriv, specifically a blemish invalidates. However, work does not invalidate kachim. So Gemara says we still need an additional pasuk. Why? It's necessary. I would have thought in other words, I would think maybe there's a distinction between work performed before the animal was sacrificed, before the animal was dedicated to sacrifice, and after the animal is dedicated to sacrifice. And right. So in other words, perhaps there's a difference that in a scenario we are in a scenario where you sanctified an animal. Now you're not allowed to use the animal for work. If you did it anyway, maybe the animal does become invalidated. So therefore, the verse tells me, Egla Rufa tells me no. Only Egla Rufa becomes invalidated by work. Other animals do not become for sacrifices, they don't become invalidated. Okay. Gufa. Gemara will examine the original statement. Amar Rabbi Yehudah Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehudah says in the name of Rav, Allah Sakin Psula. If you put empty sacks on top of the animal, that invalidates a para, a red heifer. And by Egla Rufa, until you pull the animal, it has to carry it. Meis the Gemara asks, oil means a burden. Ainly oil, a literal burden, something that the sacks are filled with something. Shara vayis minai, and other types of work. How do we know? Amrit, we say kal v'chaymer. It's a kal v'chaymer. Let's look at the comparison. Just like egla, a blemish does not invalidate. Other forms of work do invalidate. By para is more stringent because a blemish does invalidate. So certainly work should invalidate. And if you'll tell me, nemer kan oil v'nemer lahalan oil, malahalan sharavadis paisasba, afkan sharavadis paisasba, afkan sharavadis paisasba. Okay, so in other words, and let's say you'll have some sort of debate, some sort of question. The Gemara doesn't tell you what the question would be. Then I would tell you the reason how I know that that para aduma has a concept of work, even though it's learned from Egla Rufa, is because of oil. The word oil, the burden, is used in both contexts. So they're compared to each other. Okay. Mayim nefshechleimer, what's this question you might have that you would need to say they're actually not comparable by Kal V'chaymer, they're comparable by Gzera Shofel? What's the secret question you're not telling me about? Mayim nefshechleimer. V'chitem, if you tell me, if you tell me that Egla is different, because by Egla Rufa, years invalidate, whereas by a red heifer, even an older animal is still kosher. Inami, or you'll say kochim echichu. You'll say, look at kochim. Kochim shemum poitzel behen. Even though kochim are invalidated by a blemish, the ein avodah posels behen. But work does not invalidate kochim. So for two reasons, it's incomparable. First of all, you see that the relationship between work and blemishes clearly doesn't exist, because kochim become invalidated by blemish and do not have the prohibition of work. You can sanctify a work animal. Alternatively, there's no comparison because Eglah Rufa has its own restrictions over Paraduma. Eglah Rufa becomes invalidated when it's more than a year old, and Paraduma, the red heifer, does not have such a restriction. So therefore, we have to come on to Nemer Kan, oil, Mala, and Sharvaitis, Kan Sharvaitis. They're compared because of the word oil that are used in both contexts. We Makam Shabasa from the original source. Let's examine this further. Mala Halan Achatimshech, Adkan Achatimshech.
Okay, Rabbi, I'm sorry, I got to ask you page position again, please.
Okay, this is a tough one here. We are probably about 14 lines to the bottom of the page, and the first one line is Malahalan, and we're roughly smack in the middle of the smack in the middle of the line. I'm sorry. No, we're by Malahalan. Exactly, that's where we are. Okay.
46A4.
Oh, what was it? What was
46A4.
46A4, top of the page, if you have the art scroll. Okay. Okay. So let's examine. Okay, so now you have the Gzera Shava. You have the equivalency created between Eglah Rufa and Paraduma. Now we pointed out there's a distinction between Paraduma and Eglah Rufa. What's the distinction? Paraduma, the Torah says, Asher lo Allah oil, that a burden has not gone onto the animal. Whereas by Eglah Rufa, what does the Torah say? Asher lo mashcha ba'oil, that it didn't carry the burden. Oil means burden. Okay, so if that's the case, if you're learning from Eglah Rufa, then what should you say? So the Gemara has an open question here. If you're learning from Eglah Rufa, so then it should be limited. A non-burden, in other words, empty sacks, it should only invalidate the animal if they carried empty sacks. That's a form of work. Just like Eglah Rufa, you have to actually carry it because it says mashka. So Gemara says you're right. Tanoihi. It's more complicated. There's a machlekes. What's the debate? Some indeed say it's learned from Eglah Rufa, and then if it's learned from Eglah Rufa, indeed it should be the case that if you have these empty sackcloths that have to be carried, the fact that you took an empty sack and put it on top of a paraduma would not invalidate it, because it's learned from Eglah. Eglah requires carrying. And some say that actually the source of this is para itself. The Tanya we learned, oil, a burden. Ainly oil. Oil means a burden. Sharavai, other forms of work, of labor. How do we know that also invalidates a paraduma? Talmud loy mashar loy Allah aleha oil. Mikol makam. In other words, a burden means really asher loy Allah Allah. You can read it without the oil, right? So the sort of intuitive, logical way to read the verse is loy Allah Allah oil. Not on it. Has burden gone, but it could also be read without the word burden. So oil sort of is a qualification for Allah Allah. In other words, nothing went on it. Now, what type of nothing? Oil, a burden. That's a specific item. A burden means something that's constructive labor to move an item, transport it from one location to another location. But it could also be read without the word oil. Allah Allah. Nothing has gone onto the animal, even things that aren't a burden. Any type of thing that went onto it. Oil. What does the word oil mean? Oil and if you put a burden on the animal, that would invalidate a red heifer, whether it was or wasn't during the time of labor. Meaning, if a guy is loading up his red heifer to transport, beans to the city, let's say, that is prohibited. Not only that, if he puts beans on his animal, even not with the intention of transporting, just because it's cool and he doesn't want the rabbis to be able to bring his red heifer, even though, right, Doman Ben Asina got a lot of money for it, very, very wealthy. Anyway, then if he puts a burden on it, it becomes invalidated, even if he has no intention of using it to work. Whereas if he uses it to carry empty sacks, then that invalidates it because he's using it with the intention of work. Sharvayis and place al b'shasavayda. Okay, the Gemara says the emo. Let's say as follows: Asher loy olo olaha klal. Okay, so we have a rule here called klal prat. If the Torah gives a general statement, it's followed by a specific statement. The general statement is limited by the context of the specific. So this is sort of a for a lawyer here. It's a sort of question of how to interpret documents. The interpretation here is that a general rule that follows a specific example, the general rule is limited to whatever is included in the specific example. So over here we have a perfect example. We just said Asher loy Allah means nothing went onto it. What type of nothing? Any type of nothing, anything. And then oil is an example. It's a specific. Oil means a burden, a bag of beans, or a wheat, etc. So we should say that it's a klal prat, a general rule followed by a specific statement. Ein b'chlal l'masha b'prat. There is nothing in the general statement except that which is in the individual statement, and therefore we have no source that would tell us that any type of non-burden would also invalidate the animal. We together? The aim.
Can't take a general rule in this situation to expand it beyond the scope of what we were talking about.
Of the specific example given later.
Right, the specific
Yeah,
example.
yeah. So emasher loy ola klal oil prat klal prat, the general rule followed by a specific emachal masher prat. The klal, the general rule is limited by the prat. Okay, oil in midiachon aloi, specifically a burden, nothing else. Gemara says no. Asher is ribuyahu, and we've seen this a bunch of times. The word asher is sort of an inclusive term. So asher actually means anything. You have two klals followed by a prat, and therefore you can do whatever you want. The general statements are inclusive. Similarly, we have a similar brisa, similar discussion with regard to egla rufa. Oil in. I'm sorry. The pasuk says ashaloi mashcha ba'oil. You did not carry an oil, a burden. Oil in oil, only oil. Sharav minayin. Specifically, that the form of labor was the transportation of a burden. How do you know other forms of work are also included? It didn't perform any type of work, any type of labor. Even if you didn't carry a burden, you just use it to plow a field or something similar. Mikol mokum. Any type of work. Oil. So then what does Torah say the word oil? Oil posel ben b'shas savayda min shaloi b'shas savayda. A burden invalidates whether it's during the work or whether it's not during the work. Shar avoidance, other forms of work, ain paislis ela b'shas savayda. Other form of work only invalidates with the intention of work. Okay, in other words, if it carries a burden, then no matter whether it was intentioned or unintentioned, the animal's invalid. So if you put the beans on top of the ox, whatever calf, male calf, it will, and the calf takes a walk, then it's invalid. Even if it takes a walk in a circle, it comes right back to you. However, if you do another form of work, it has to be with intention. If it trampled across your field and ended up plowing, if that somehow is possible, then the animal is not invalid. You can still use the animal for egg level. Okay, the Gemara asks, the amo, let's say the same thing. Ashaloi ubadba, it did not perform a work. Klal, that's a general statement. Oil, a burden. Prat is a specific example. Klal, a prat, embachal, mashav, prat. The general statement is limited by the specific statement. Oil in midiachon aloi. Specifically burden, no other type of work is included. So Gemara gives the same response. Asher ibuyahu. Asher is an inclusive statement, so you have two klolim, two general statements followed by a specific statement, and therefore the inclusive statements are fully inclusive and not limited by the specifics. Amar Bavu. Bavu said, "Boy minei mi Rabbi Yochanan, mishicha ba'ol b'kamo." So we say that it has to be moshech ba'ol, it has to carry the burden. How far does it have to walk? Amar lei kamoli oil, as big as the burden itself. So you think if it has a big box, it has to walk the length of the box. If it has a small amount of beans in a bag, it has to walk the length of a bag. Lengthwise or widthwise. I'll explain to you Rabbi Yochanan's statement. It's one tefach of walking. Let him say tefach. The oil tefach. Rabbi Yochanan was the shear is a tefach. Rabbi Yochanan was trying to point out that when we talk about a burden, the definition of a burden is a tefach. Meaning, if a person is selling an animal as quote unquote a virgin animal, it has never worked before. So the definition of work would be it did not carry anything bigger than one hand's breadth. That would be the definition of such an animal. Correct. This is more of a theoretical prospect than I don't know how practical this is in the first place. Okay. Amr B'Yechon ben Shol. Rabbi Yechon ben Shol said, "Neima Amr Torah hevi egla benachal." Why did the Torah say take an egla, a young calf, and bring it into this? It's brought to this nachal eisen. Nachal eisen is a place which ideally nothing grows in. It's a place where that's not conducive to growth. Why is that? Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, God said, "Yavai davar shalei asa peres v'yarif magam she'ein asa peres." This young animal, which did not provide peres, future, it didn't provide growth. Say it didn't provide fruit, and it should be killed in a place that does not produce fruit. And it will atone al mishalei peres on a person that was not allowed to be fruitful. My peres, what does peres mean? What does it mean fruit? If it means reproduction. What happens if somebody's old or he's infertile, or he's castrated? Are you going to say that we don't do egla rufa? Ela mitzvahs. Fruitful means mitzvahs. He was not able to live to his full capacity to perform mitzvahs. Okay, let's continue. Esan means hard like a rock, like you think. How do we know the word esan means hard? Your place is esan, and you'll place your things in a rock, which basically means that esan here is rock. Another example is Shimu Harim Yisrael Hashem ve'esanim ma'aseh haaretz. Over here we see the mountains, which are comprised of rock, are also called esanim. Acher, another opinion says this is often a reference to Reb Meir. He was called Acher. Why was Reb Meir called Acher? It's a whole separate discussion. He refused to concede an argument. And sometimes it's called Reb Meir, sometimes it's called Acher, depending on if it happened before or afterwards. Okay. How do we know that Esan is old? A nation from time immemorial, that's called a nation of Esan. So Esan is also an older place. An older meaning as in it hasn't been recently covered, sort of like a bedrock, which has always been exposed. Okay. You take an axe and you kill it from the back of the neck. My time, if you compare the splitting of the egla rufa to the killing of the charas ha'ayif, which is killed from the back of the neck. Its place cannot be used for work. You can't plant on it and you can't grow. Okay, it's interesting. The word lo ye'aved seems to imply past tense. It hasn't been planted. Gemara says l'sha'avar in the past. Divrei Rabbi Yasha, it's the opinion of Rabbi Yasha. Lahabo. It means future tense. Rava Amar, Rava says lahabo. Nobody disagrees that this piece of land is forbidden in the future from planting on. Rather, they disagree. They also disagree. What about in the past? If this was in the past a place of growth, can you perform the egla roof in that place? Rav Yasha savar miksiv v'lo yu'ubad. It says v'lo yaved. 1 second. Shelo ye'aved. 1 second. Does it say v'lo ye'ubad? It says asher lo ye'aved. It says that which will never be planted. It doesn't say that which hasn't been planted. Rabbi Yehudah's son. 1 second. I'm sorry. Contrary. Hold on a second. Okay. He says because it says asher. Second. Asher lo ye'aved. Ye'aved is future tense. It should have said asher lo ye'ubad. It should have said past tense. Rabbi Yehudah says miksiv asher lo nevad. It could have said a much more clear distinction of past tense, which would be nevad. It hasn't been planted in the past. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Asher Asher l'sha'avar mashma. The word Asher, that implies, it does do the implication of the past tense, and therefore the reference here is past tense. Rabbi Yonasan Asher Ribuyi, Rabbi Yonasan said, no, Asher is an inclusive term, not a term of past tense. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yonasan, the Ge'aved is enough of a reference to future tense. Okay. You can clean, you can comb flax or clean stones. Specifically planting. And how do we know other forms of work? Any type of work. So what does the Torah say? You shouldn't plant it. To tell you, it has to be where the work takes place in the ground itself. Combing flax or cleaning stones, it takes place on the space, but doesn't involve the ground itself. The Gemara says same questions before. Let's say lo ovid, no work is a general statement, right? Lo yizarea, and not to plant is a specific example. Klal prat ein b'klal masher prat. Zria in midyachlin aloi. The Gemara says again, Asher. The word Asher is ribuya, who is an inclusive statement. Okay, we'll continue for a few minutes. Ziknei ha'ir roichtzin yedayim. The elders of the city wash their hands. Taner rabbanon. Because ziknei ha'ir ha'ia kroiv melachol yir chutzuas yedayim al egla rufa benachol. The elders of the city that's closest, they wash their hands on top of the egla rufa in this nachal, this space which nothing will grow in. She'en tamad leimer ha'arufa. Doesn't have to say the arufa because we already know that you've already split the animal in half. Why is it called an egla rufa? Matam leimer ha'arufa. Al mokam arifasa shel egla. The washing hands takes place on the location of where the egla, the animal, was killed. V'amru, and they say, our hands did not spill his blood, and our eyes have not seen it. Do we think that these senior members of the court are murderers? We have not let him go. We have not let him leave our city without carrying enough food. And we have not seen him and let him go without direction, navigation. In other words, tell him how to go from point A to point B. Tanya, we learned, Mayor would say, we force people to give proper directions. It's compulsory, it's mandatory. If somebody comes to your house, you have to tell them how to get back. If you're with somebody, you're going on different roads, you need to make sure he has proper navigation. Because the reward of Levia, of escorting, Levia literally means to escort, but you'll see in the context it actually means to give direction. There's no limit. Why? Shenemar. It's an interesting story here. But Yiru Hashem ish yotzim in the they placed siege on the city. They're trying to capture the city, and they saw someone leave the city. But they said to him, tell us, how do we get into the city? The city was fortified, couldn't break into the city. They saw somebody leaving the city though. They said, how do you get out? We need to conquer the city. And if you tell us how to get in, we will perform for you a chesed, kindness. The verse states, he showed them how to get in. What was the chesed that they did? They killed out the entire city. They conquered the city. However, that man they let alone. And furthermore, what happened? That man went to the land of the Chitim. He built a city. He created and he named the city Luz. The name, this city still exists. Tanya, he Luz Shitzayim by Tchelas. This is the city that they died at Tchelas. He Luz Shabbos and Cherev Bilbula. So Cherev came to conquer Israel. He conquered most of it, and he sent everyone flying to different countries. So they didn't have planes, but otherwise he kicked them out of their territory and he relocated them. That was part of his military strategy in general. So Cherev relocated everyone, because he felt that if you weren't in the land you grew up in, you felt uncomfortable and you wouldn't rebel against him. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar came later and conquered the land, and he did not destroy the city. Even the angel of death, he has no permission to enter the city. When the elders of the city they have dementia and they lose themselves, they leave the city, and they die. And the Gemara asks, this should be a kal v'chomer. This Kanani, He didn't even speak. But he didn't escort them. He merited that him and his children forever merited a sort of a permanent salvation from death. Someone who escorts and gives direction by literally walking the person to his destination certainly merits a great reward. Okay, but how did he teach? How did he show them how to get into the city? Chizkiah said he spoke out the directions. Okay, the Gemara seems to imply he didn't speak. Okay, so what actually happened is he moved his lips in a way that they were able to interpret what he said. He didn't speak, so he moved his lips, and from that they figured out how to get into the city. And Rabbi Yehudah, he gave them directions by pointing. We have Bryce that supports the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. He gave directions by pointing. The Bryce specifically says because he pointed with his finger, he merited salvation. Rabbi Levi says, somebody who is walking along the road and does not have an escort, Yasik b'Torah, he should learn Torah. Because Torah is Levias Chain, it is an escort of charm, and therefore it is a way for a person to support himself, even if he doesn't have an escort. For Rabbi Levi says, because of the 4 steps that Pari made sure that Avram was escorted. This is after Pari stole Avram's wife. And told him how to leave it. Pari did not want them in Mitzrayim because Pari was concerned that Mitzrayim was so promiscuous that somebody else would steal his wife again. So he sent them out, and he told people to escort them. He escorted them 4 steps. Because of those 4 steps, he merited that the Jewish people were enslaved by Pari for 400 years. They had to work for 400 years. Okay. God willing, tomorrow I will again try to start promptly on time. So that'll be 6 o'clock tomorrow. And I'm just doing this because typically we do 5 minutes later, but there's no way we're full behind anyway. But it's just, it was very long. And yeah. Anyway, okay. Great day.
Yasher Koach from Seattle, no less.
I'm sorry?
Oh, I said Yasher Koach from Seattle.
Oh, okay. Enjoy your trip.
Thank you.